Now 250,000. Now I'm going to get 275. High, I'm going to get 275. 3. Now 300,000. Now 3 1/4, 325. High, I'm going to get 3 1/4, I'm going to get 325. Now half. Now I'm going to get 300.
All right. Well, good morning from Dallas. We are at the center of the universe in Dallas, Texas, at the intersection of the North Dallas Tollway and the LBJ Freeway. And you're joining the 80th episode of the Mike McGavel Jones Show here in Dallas. And we're broadcasting from here and all around the world. We've got folks down in South Africa watching, and Ireland, and Australia, and we always welcome our international friends. We have a great show today. I'm going to start off by talking about a couple of events that have happened in the last 7 days that for many people it affected us. And first, I would like to recognize the passing of Charlie Daniels, the Hall of Fame, Country Music Hall of Fame legend, who passed away actually within the last hour in Nashville, Tennessee, a week ago today. And so we send our condolences to Charlie's family, his wife Hazel of 55 years, and also Charlie Jr. We had the great opportunity to work with Charlie 3 or 4 times, specifically for St. Jude Children's Hospital. One of the reasons I'm wearing the tie today is kind of in honor of Charlie. I was wearing this tie when Charlie and I worked together then, and because of a gentleman named Joe Hager who got me involved with St. Jude Children's Hospital many years ago. It was an honor to meet Charlie Daniels. I will tell you that from a personal standpoint, there's not I don't think there was a more patriotic American than Charlie Daniels. He dedicated his life to entertaining the veterans that we have, our military, supporting good causes. He was a great Christian. He didn't just walk the walk. He didn't just walk the deal or talk the deal. He was the real deal. And I said that a few days ago. I said he absolutely was the real deal. I would tell you that if you get a chance, go to Charlie's website, the Charlie Daniels Band website, and watch a rerun of the service that was held Saturday. It's about an hour and 20 minutes, but I guarantee you'll enjoy it. And it brought in a lot of people. There were quite a few entertainers that sang. The military was very front and center, had a great honor guard, and we certainly are going to miss Charlie Daniels. Fortunately, a lot of you know that I collect memorabilia, and I've got several things that Charlie signed for me in my home, and I've got a guitar and things of that nature. Interestingly, in 2018, when we did the Dallas Cattle Barons Ball benefiting the American Cancer Society, Charlie played on my stage, and then we auctioned off a fiddle for $25,000 benefiting the cancer research. So our hats off to a great legend in country music and a great humanitarian and a person that will be missed greatly. Secondly, on Wednesday of last week, I lost my father to lung cancer, and stage 4 lung cancer. He'd been in the hospital for about a week, 2 weeks, and wrapped up his life in home hospice, being dutifully taken care of by my sister Lori, who was with him, and I appreciate her so much being there, his wife Carol, and the rest of the family. We'll actually be having his visitation this afternoon at 5 o'clock from 5 to 7. I'll be leaving Dallas after this show and be headed down to College Station to the Callaway Jones Funeral Home, and then we will have his service tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock with interment in the afternoon around 2:30 outside of Franklin, Texas. So And, you know, it's always hard to lose a family member, especially your father. I did not spend my entire life with him. We had an interesting life. He had two lives, and that's just the way life goes sometimes. But I was happy to spend the last 35 to 40 years with him and being able to be a part of his life, and he and mine. So Godspeed to Jerry Blansett. Today we've got an outstanding show. I'm really very excited. If you are, whether you're into sports or not, whether you're into soccer or not, the story is a life story, and it's a story of a life that has been well lived and has a lot of excitement in it, a lot of travel, a lot of history. And this morning I'd like to welcome Gordon Jago. If we could bring him up on our screen. There's Gordon Jago right there. And Gordon Jago, and I should say MBE, we'll add that behind his name, has been an English soccer player. Do we call it soccer over there, or is it football? Yep. I wanted to make sure I got that right. Well, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Mike. Delighted to be with you, and looking forward to the next few minutes where we're going to talk about the long life that I've had and the enjoyable life that I've had.
Well, it's really funny. You and I have become friends over the last probably 6 weeks or so. We just keep running into each other. Weekly, we run into each other. And I've had just a wonderful time visiting with you and learning about your life. And then when I asked you how old you were, I was thinking, you're in your 70s, and you said 87, and I'm just like, wow. I'd probably won't make 87, but if I made 87, I'd be happy to look like you. So you've had a very historic career in what we would call as English football or American soccer. Tell me about your life. Tell me about where you were born and what year and all that.
Yeah, but I think the most important factor is that I'm one of those very fortunate people, Mike, who have been able to do something that I've told my whole life and enjoy and make a living out of it.
Yeah.
And here I am at this old age, still involved, and involved with youth soccer, which is incredible. But it all started way back. I was born in the East End of London, within the sound of the Bow Bells, which is a church, and I'm a Cockney. Mm-hmm. I'm a Cockney. I presume you could compare it to something like coming from the Bronx of New York.
I gotcha.
And so I was born way back in 1932 in that area. My father was an engineer, and I grew up in that area until the war came. Mm-hmm. And of course, when the Second World War started, I was 9, I think, at the time.
Yep.
And we had the very bad blitz from the Germans, and eventually we moved mm-hmm. from London out into the suburbs in the county of Kent. But those first few years were very interesting because, particularly with the war, to be so young, you didn't realise that when we were getting the attacks from the Germans and the fighter pilots fighting them, you'd look up in the sky and you thought it was a game. Mm-hmm. As a kid, you didn't realise it was life and death. Sure. But then the bombing became very excessive. They were attacking the London docks, setting the city alight. And my father told me many years afterwards that he had a premonition that he had to move. And sure enough, we moved. And 2 months after we moved, there was a direct hit on the house behind us and the shelter that we lived in. Because at those times, as soon as darkness came, that's when the German bombers would come, the sirens would go, and you had this shelter at the back of the garden dug, and you'd go off, trooping off with everything, and you'd be there and sleep the night in there. And as I say, 2 months after we left, a direct hit on the house behind, and the shelter was gone. And wow. So that premonition, as he told me many years afterwards, certainly was correct. But it was a difficult time, more so for your parents than the kids. You didn't realise perhaps as much. And then when I moved over to the county of Kent, that's when I first started playing soccer. I was probably around about 8 or 9 years of age, 10 years of age, and that's how my whole career started. I had success as a schoolboy, playing for the county, playing for London schools against Glasgow, and I hold a record there. I played 3 times in that game, so once in Glasgow and twice in London, and then eventually things just developed. I went to school, went to college, but played soccer, and I had the honour then of playing for England, and under 18 international. I played 6 internationals and was captain of the England side. So as a young boy playing soccer, certainly in England, I was very fortunate. I had a great time.
Going back just a little bit to the war, because that's one of the most historical measurements in our lifetimes. In the United States, of course, we had the Civil War, and then we had World War I, and then World War II. And you were, before the show, I even mentioned that you were born in between the Great Depression and World War II.
Correct, yes.
And, you're a lesson in history. The story you just told, there's very few people around that can tell that story about being in England and what you had to deal with.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because I had the opportunity to be on a Norman Hitchcock show, and he asked me about growing up, and then I got an invitation from schools here in Dallas to go and speak about it. They were covering that part of history in their curriculum, and I was there, and I wasn't certain, what to talk about. And the first one I went to, they were 11 years of age, boys and girls. And I had all these facts about how many bombers were shot down, and I realized then, right there and then, it wasn't going to work with these kids. So I just talked about myself. And the interesting thing was that really I hit home with these kids. There was a little girl sitting in the front row, and I said, "What's your name?" And she said, "Mary." And I said, "Who's your friend next to you?" So that's Sheila. So I said, "Okay, tomorrow, when you come to school, Sheila's desk is empty. She's not there. What do you think?" I said, "And then she doesn't come the next day or the next day. What do you think?" And she said, "Oh, she's probably sick." So I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, in my day, unfortunately, when that desk next to me was empty, that person was never coming back because they'd been killed in one of the air raids on London." And that really hit these kids.
Yeah. And
I'll never forget it, the reaction. And I didn't realize that it would bring that about. Yep. But that was true. And my school was bombed completely. And a little quick story, if I may.
Sure.
When we were the school teachers, we had this little red box of so it was just, and we were given a bar of chocolate, some raisins, some biscuits, little things like that, and they were rationed at that time. To get a bar of chocolate in England.
That's a big deal.
That was special.
Yeah.
Anyway, we all had a box, and we had a little name on it, and we went to go to school one day. And they were the shelter was at the bottom of the school, in fact, and these boxes were in the shelter. Anyway, cut the story short as I can, come around the corner.
You just tell your story.
Came around the corner, and the school flattened. It had been bombed the night before. And so there was about 4 or 5 of the boys going in with us. And what's our first thought? Not about the wreck. Bar of chocolate. So we're in the rumble, Mike, looking for boxes. Anybody's box.
Rummaging around.
Yeah, we don't worry whose name's on that box. So we want to find a box with the goodies in.
Did you find them?
And no, well, we're looking, and all of a sudden, police whistles. Police came from everywhere. And they were grabbing us and pulling us out because they said, "Don't you realize you could? It could have collapsed." And they were concerned about us. Safety. I mean, sure. We were concerned about the chocolate. Well, we're going to get a bar of chocolate, and that was so to school. And then we had to go to school in a church, and you could only go because there's so many kids, and the church could only hold so many. So you either went in the morning, or went in the afternoon. But it was a very difficult time, of course, and more so for your parents than you. But to see, I mean. Even after all these years, I can still recollect the blaze when they set London alight. The German bombers came over and they dropped thousands of incendiary bombs, and they set the whole place. And it was just one red glow, and you'll never forget that.
Sure.
And growing up as a youngster,
Like watching the Hindenburg go down.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting time. But as I say, the war ended, thank goodness, and we lived in a very nice part of Kent. Started playing soccer, as I've said, and just went on from there. And it's
What did your father do?
My father was an engineer, and he was not called up for the army because they were making brass in munitions, and so they needed brass for the shells and the cannons, the bullets, and so he was exempt. But it must have been harrowing for him, particularly, to go to work every day as they did. The bombing would come, and have that responsibility. But he was a good man, and he was a good mentor. I think he taught me a way of life that served me well for the rest of my life.
So which queen did we have at that time?
We didn't. We had a king.
Had a king.
Yes, we had King. It was King Albert, I think, because King George became the one when Andrew I think it was Andrew stood down. He was marrying Mrs. Simpson, and so King George became the king. King George must have been in the war. Yeah, just before the war, he became king, and he appointed Winston Churchill.
No kidding.
As the Prime Minister. Winston Churchill was not elected Prime Minister.
He was appointed.
He was appointed first time. And then after the war, he lost the election.
Really?
He didn't. And people, I think,
war.
Right after the war, they voted the Labour Party in, and Churchill had done so much. But I think there was a vote because the people wanted to forget the war.
Yeah.
And
he was a relic.
And he was a relic and associated. But then he got elected. And I must be careful, it's a history lesson. He got elected as Prime Minister at the age of 80.
Wow.
Yeah. And,
well, I mean, listen, you know why I like to hear history? Because you can't hear it anymore. It's not taught in schools the same. It's very different.
Yes, that's
very
true.
Very different.
Yeah.
And to hear this perspective, as a young person growing up, we learned a lot about, World War II, and probably quite a bit about World War I even, because it wasn't that many years, 50, 60 years, and but I've always, people know I love history, And,
well, of course, I grew up at that period of time when all the American troops were coming into England and ready for the invasion to France, and I saw my first baseball game because there's American servicemen were stationed near where I was, and they had a baseball game, and so I saw baseball for the first time in my life.
How old were you then?
Oh, geez, 9, 10, 11, 12, somewhere around 12 years of age.
You have a good recollection. You have a good memory. You're very fortunate.
I'm very fortunate in that respect. The good Lord's been kind and in health factor, and I've been very fortunate.
See, I'm the same way. I can remember things when I was 2 years old. I remember specific things that happened, and I can go to my hometown and I can drive the streets, and I can tell you what used to be there 50 years ago. And people go, "How do you remember that?" I said, I don't know, but I can't remember what I did yesterday.
That's right.
and
that's it.
That's a sign.
Why did I walk across the room?
Really, I know I came over here for something.
Yeah.
So what did your mother do?
She was just a housewife. Yeah. In those days, women were housewives. They didn't go to work.
They used to be called just a housewife. That's been redefined.
Yeah. Well, I had a sister, younger sister, 2 years younger, so mother looked after both of us. Dad went off to work every day, and that's how we grew up.
Is your sister still with us?
No, we lost her, unfortunately, when she was only 52.
52?
She had cancer, and we lost her early, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's sad.
But, she was... But we had, considering all the problems, my father and father looked after us very, very well. Mm-hmm. And, as I've said, growing up during that period of time with all the problems of World War II and being in London with what was happening, as I say, it must have been very, very difficult for them.
Oh, yeah.
But they did a good job with us, I think. And both Rita and I grew up, and I'd like to think that we were pretty pretty good citizens.
It's pretty interesting when you think about the fact that you could only go to school in the morning or the afternoon.
Yeah.
Now we're dealing with a situation where the kids don't know if they're going to go to school or not.
Correct.
And the other question is, how much school are they actually getting when if they're going to have to be home?
Yeah.
How much are they actually receiving in education? And we're in a really
Very difficult.
another interesting, difficult time.
Yeah.
Very different. Very different.
That's
Because
right.
now many of our homes are two working people. They're
Correct.
both trying to work. They have to have those incomes to do the things that this lifestyle or society thinks they need, whether
Correct.
it's 3 cars and a boat or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think one thing that's happening probably is people are having to rethink their lifestyles, where they want to live, what they want to do. We're having a major run on rural property, country property here in the United States.
Yes.
People are exiting the cities, much like your father and
Yeah.
mother, moved to the suburbs. Well, people that move to the suburbs, a lot of them are starting to look at buying a country property or, an acre or
Yes.
2 acres. Well, that's big compared to a tract house in McKinney or Plano.
And brought about completely different circumstances, from a war to the problems that we're getting today for people with the economy, etc. But no, as I say, very fortunate. Grew up well with a good family background, thanks to mum and dad. And then, as I said, had the good fortune to play soccer.
Yeah.
And at 12 years of age was the very first time people start to look at you because of playing for the district, playing for the county, playing for the state, and then playing for your country. All that kind of followed on. And so I had a lot of success, and thankfully enjoyed it. And of course, when I got picked for England, that was the ultimate.
That was the big one.
Oh, yeah, to play for your country at 18 years of age.
Sure.
And to be captain of the team. And then later on in life, of course, I became a senior player and I became a coach. I became the coach of the under-18 England team. And there was only,
What year would this have been?
this would have been in the 60s.
Okay, let's back up. I know that you had a long and great marriage.
Yes.
So tell me about it.
Yes, I was married for 54 years. My wife, June, was a police officer in London.
And you call them a what?
A Bobby.
Yeah.
But again, this is a long while ago, and there were very, very few women police officers around. And you can imagine when I first met her, and we met at a public dance, as we did in those days. And during the course of conversation, what do you do? What do you do? And she said, I'm a police officer. I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. I was now involved in the police. And I joked many years afterwards. I always told the story. I said, when I met you and she arrested me, and she gave me the choice of getting married or going to prison. And I chose the wrong one because I'd been out years ago for good behavior. And I told that to 1,200 police officers here in Dallas at the World Trade Center. I almost got killed by June that night. But she was a great woman, a very, very great woman. And of course, that leads on to something else later on with the donations to from the book.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about the book too. You had a daughter.
I had one daughter, yes, Kim. And
where does she live?
She's now in Tampa, Florida. She's a school teacher and doing exceptionally well, her and her husband. No children, but she's grown into a very fine woman. And my wife did a terrific job with Kim. Because I was, manager of a major league team, and life was pretty busy, and I didn't perhaps have as much time with my daughter as I should have done in the early days.
I think a lot of us have done that.
But I was trying to do what I thought was the right thing to provide for them, be successful. But June did a great job. She was quite a woman, and as I say, a police officer in the department. And there's one quick story there I must tell, because it was interesting. I'm courting, right? And I'm going to see her one evening, and she calls and she says, I won't be able to see you tonight. So I said, well, why is that? So she said, I'm going away. So I said, well, where are you going? I can't tell you. I said, well, how long will you be away? She said, I can't tell you. So she said, I'll call you when I get back. Well, I thought that was the elbow push out.
You were freaking out.
Yeah, no, that's it. This was her way of getting out of the relationship.
Yeah. I'm tied up.
Well, very quickly, 4 days later, she calls me back. She'd been away on undercover work for the police, and couldn't tell me what it's all about until afterwards.
So how long did you date before you got married?
About 18 months.
Yeah.
18 months, and
You almost made it 2 years.
almost 18 months, and
What year did you get married?
1960.
60.
Yeah, I think it was 1960, and my daughter was born in 1964. Yes,
So before you came to the United States, what was the most successful thing that you did before coming to the United States in soccer?
Well, as I said, I had a good career as a player, and I had 12 years as a major league player.
That's a good period of time.
So it was a good time. And then I became a coach. I had 2 good mentors. And then, of course, I became a major league manager. And that was the greatest team that I could have ever had at the Queen's Park Rangers Football Club. And we gained promotion from the second division at that time to the major league, to the first division. And to bring that about, I had a great group of players, really good. I suppose we did a good job in our selection, but they were good. They weren't only good players; they were good people, and so it was a very, very happy time. And to get promotion to the first division was just tremendous. It was a great moment in my life, thanks to a lot of good young men who performed for us, and nothing but good memories.
So you've had this tremendous career, and I'm assuming you traveled the world.
Yes, at somebody else's expense.
Right. Well,
Which
that's
I always
important.
joke about, but it was true. I mean, that was our life, and I had so long. I had 12 years as a player, I had many years as a coach and as a manager, and the team, you were always going, getting invitations to travel, and that's what brought me to America first time. I was coach to the Fulham Football Club in the first division, and we had an invitation to come to Oakland, California.
And what year was this?
And this would have been, 66, 67, probably 67, 1967 possibly.
Okay.
And we came across and we played a Hungarian team, and it was all to do with promotion of soccer.
Sure.
They were just going to start a big professional league in the United States, and they had these teams coming in from overseas to play, to kind of set the thing in motion and get it started. And we came across, and of course, we landed in New York, then flew on to San Francisco, and we had 3 or 4 days in San Francisco, and that was my first impression of America, and it couldn't have been better.
Sure.
And I met a lot of American soccer people while I was here, and then when I came back after the tour, they were asking me, would I come back and take one of the clubs? And so that's how I came back again to the Baltimore Orioles in Baltimore as their head coach of the Baltimore-based soccer club, and that would have been 68 through 70. I was there.
Was this outside or in?
Outside,
indoor?
yes,
You were
outside.
doing
Yes,
that?
I didn't get involved in indoor soccer until many years afterwards, because I had 2 years with the Baltimore Orioles, and then the league started to go a little bit wrong, and so I went back. And my wife's mother was dying of cancer, unfortunately, so we went back to England in 70, and I became coach at Queen's Park Rangers Football Club in 1970, and then I became the manager in 72, and I stayed there until 76. So I had five good years with Queen's Park
So
Rangers.
football players in England are revered.
Yes,
You are-
well,
you-
like footballers and baseball, basketball players in this country.
You're celebrities.
And well, you're in the eye of the public. You're being reported upon, your games, your performances. There wasn't too much television in those days; it was just starting. But my club was very close to the BBC headquarters, and so if anything happened and they wanted someone to talk about football quickly, I was on the doorstep, and so I probably got a lot more awareness and attention because of where I was a manager of Queen's Park Rangers, right by the BBC, and so I got a lot of publicity and such in that, and then it was it didn't do me any harm. It helped me along the way.
Sure. It made you somebody.
Well, yeah,
You had the career. I mean,
Yes.
you'd proven yourself, but then you also became one of the faces.
Yeah,
of the sport.
that's well, of all sports in both this country. If you're getting attention on the television and such, and in those days we had to make a lot of visits to businesses, clubs. You had a lot of invitations to sports dinners, and you'd have the opportunity to speak. And as I say, most British soccer players and managers, you all had a dinner suit.
Yep.
Because you did get so many invitations to dinners, which were black tie.
Sure.
And but it was a nice part of life. You're doing something you thoroughly loved. You get an enjoyment, and I was fortunate. I was getting success, and I had a wonderful marriage, a wonderful wife, wonderful daughter. As I said, I've been so damn fortunate. And those years, particularly at Queen's Park, they were probably the most enjoyable, and of course then, as I said later on in the book, the saddest day of my life was when I left Queen's Park Rangers.
Yeah.
But that was a difference of opinion with an owner.
It happens.
And it happens. And so I said thank you, but no thank you, and I departed.
When did the word soccer come into play?
Primarily here in the United States, because you already had the NFL.
Yep.
And so in 1966, when the World Cup finals were being played in England, Lamar Hunt, who owned the Cowboys,
Who lived here.
he lived here and became a good friend. And I'm still friends with his boys now to this day. Lamar loved what he saw, and he wanted to have a professional league here. And he was the man behind it. And so he started to get other business people interested. And of course, they couldn't call it football because of NFL.
Yep.
So soccer, which was a slang word almost in the rest of the world at that time, became American soccer.
Interesting. I always wondered about that because I knew that it was considered football in Europe.
Oh yes, everywhere, and still
everywhere.
is, and still is to this day.
Yeah.
But of course, we've all become accustomed to the word soccer thanks to the American audience, etc. And we use it. We have to use it because we don't want to be compared with soccer,
Sure.
with football.
With football. So our chief operating officer for United Country Real Estate and United Real Estate, who lives in Austin, his name is David Dickey. And David I knew nothing about soccer, okay? But the kids were all starting to play it.
Yes.
There were all these little leagues running around,
Yes.
and David played soccer, and was a big proponent of soccer, and he and I cohabitated up in Kansas City, and whenever he was in town from Texas, he would stay at my home, and I would check my television, and my DVR is full, and it's all these soccer games. Because he would record soccer games all over the world and all the cups. I mean, if soccer was being played, it was being recorded at my home in Kansas City. And so I did get introduced to soccer by David, and then also Jason Cole, our treasurer, our finance guy, and he. So we had attended some of the Kansas City. Was it
Yes.
Kansas City United, is it?
And City.
What is it, Kansas City?
Oh, I don't know now. I should know. I think it was United.
Well,
Kansas
anyway,
City.
I think it is. I'm not there now, so I don't.
No.
I'm not going to
I
that.
should know, but I mean, because they were one of the first teams in the league way back
Yeah.
when Lamar started, and they were the ones that were still around when the problems arose, and there were only 5 teams left.
Yeah.
Kansas City was still one of those 5. Them, St. Louis.
But they draw well.
Oh, yes.
They draw well now.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about how. Where did the invitation come from to come to the U.S.?
It came from the first time, as I said, was
Baltimore.
Orioles, and I went back, and then I was manager at QPR, and a friend of mine said that he had contact with the Tampa Bay Rowdies, and Mr. George Strawbridge, who the owner, was interested in me becoming the head coach. Well, of course, at that time I was having such a successful time in England and I was enjoying it. It wasn't on. But anyway, to cut a long story short again, I recommended 6 or 7 people to them who could be their possible head coach, and they picked one of them.
Let me show a photograph. You ready in the booth? Okay. I want to show this photo. This is a great picture of Gordon.
Tampa Airport.
That's at the Tampa Airport. So this is, do you have any details on that?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Do you remember what kind of an airplane that was?
It was a big one.
747 looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very large one.
That's a catchy.
And they put us in the engine. And,
that was catchy.
it was a promotional picture for the airlines.
Sure.
And that would have been Eastern Airlines at that time.
Probably.
At
Probably.
that time out of
they
Tampa.
Were big. Sure.
And they were one of our sponsors there. And anyway, as I say, I recommended a fellow to Eddie Fermani, a South African player with me at Charlton, and he came over as the head coach for the Tampa Bay Rowdies. And George Strawbridge then invited me over for a summer vacation for a couple of weeks for helping him get Eddie, and so June and I came over, and that was a nice visit to Tampa. And then later on, Eddie moved off and he went over to New York, and so George knocked on my door again, and they persuaded me to come over to Tampa Bay and be the coach of Tampa Bay Rowdies. That would have been in 78, 1978, and had a great time there.
Then you leave Tampa.
And then the league was struggling again, because in those days for soccer it was very difficult.
Well, we had so many sports in the U.S. too.
We had some success. I mean, and we were drawing very well in Tampa, averaging 30,000, even outdrawing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at that time. New York was doing well with the Cosmos, but there were teams in San Antonio and other cities that tried to keep up and probably overspent and that sort of thing. And so the league was in trouble, and I was preparing to go back to England, and that would have been 1984. And I got a call from the Dallas Mavericks, and they said, "We've just purchased an indoor soccer team. Would you be interested in coming as the head coach?" And I said, "No, I'm not interested in indoor soccer. No, I'm going back to England." Anyway, 2 days later, 2 gentlemen knocked on my front door from Dallas. The general manager, Ron Atkins, and Bill Nuttall, their player personnel. And they knocked on the door and said, "We want Mr. Carter, the owner."
Don Carter.
Don Carter, a wonderful, wonderful man, wanted to see me. And would I come? So as a matter of courtesy to him, I flew over to Dallas and met him.
You met a character.
Oh, unbelievable. Unfortunately, I was warned about it before. They said, during your interview, he will insult you, and during his interview, he will suddenly stop talking. And that was so vital because it prepared me for it. Otherwise, I might have reacted differently if I hadn't known that. Because sure enough, after a little while, he said, "Don't you think you're too old to be the head coach?" So I went back with a very polite but very strong answer. That was it. I might have blown up if I hadn't known it.
Yeah.
Right? And then he suddenly stopped talking. So I stopped. I just sat there. And I think he was looking, and I found out later on when he interviewed McLeod for his Mavericks coach.
John McLeod.
Used
to be the head coach of the Mavericks.
I read an article from John, and he said exactly the same. When he had his interview with Don Carter for a Mavs head coach, he did the same 2 things. And so I got over that. But Mr. Carter was great, and he played a very important part in my life, and we lost him about a year ago. But great man.
Certainly the face of the Mavericks for many years. Of course, our logo was the cowboy hat, and everybody from Dallas took a lot of pride with the Mavericks. We weren't very good for a long time. But if you lived in Dallas and you got to know the players in Dallas, you loved them no matter what they did.
Correct.
And I think we kind of came to the conclusion we might be a long time before we ever won anything. We were blessed to have Dirk join us. But, of course, we had a good run prior to that, in the 80s, the Derek Harpers and all those guys, Rolando Blackman. But,
I mean, the quality of the teams at that time.
Oh.
man!
Well, look who they were
me.
playing against.
I mean, Los Angeles, Boston.
Yep.
Wonderful basketball
Yeah.
team. So the Mavericks were not that good at that time,
Right.
and so it was hard competition because. But as I say, Mr. Carter and Norm Sonja, the general manager, class people, very supportive of us because that first year I came here for the indoor was terrible. We went 12-36, and but Mr. Carter was supportive all the time, and his viceman. We talked it over early on in the season that we weren't quite good enough because I'd been brought in when the team had already been assembled,
Yep.
and so
You inherited.
I inherited. And it wasn't very long before I realized that they weren't quite good enough. And I said that to Mr. Carter, and he said, okay, we'll take our licks. You get prepared for next season. And so that was the object of the exercise. And he said, and I'll never forget it, he said, all I ask, he said, is that if they lose at the end of the game, they run up the corridor. He said,
With their heads up.
with their heads up.
Yep.
He said, and if they do that and give effort, that's fine by me.
Yep.
He said, I'll support them. And that
As
was
long
it.
as they look
And
like,
we
as long as they look like champions.
yeah, and they gave effort.
Yep.
Yeah, he said they crawl up the corridor with blood on their knees. That's fine by me. But a great man to work with, very supportive, and of course 2 years later we won the championship.
Yep. Tell me who that is.
Oh, that's a young man, Tatu on the left, and Kevin Smith on the right. English boy and a Brazilian boy.
Do you know what year this was?
That would have been 70. We won the first championship in, oh Lord, I came here in 75, 78, 1978.
So Tatu became iconic.
Yes.
In Dallas, and then in everywhere.
Everywhere.
I mean, everybody knew who Tatu was.
In the soccer world,
the soccer
and the indoor
world.
soccer world, Tatu was known. And the reason being, when he scored a goal, he would take his shirt off
Yep.
and throw it in the stands.
Yep.
And
I can still see it.
And of course, I think we were with Nike at the time. They were sort of happy about it. It was a great promotion.
Sure.
And I know the first time we played away, it was at Baltimore. He scored a goal, and so he threw his shirt, and the fans threw it straight back at him.
I have another great photograph. I'm going to let you see it first before I show it,
Yes.
because you remember who all's in it, right?
Yes.
Okay.
it's-
So I'm going to show that, and you can see it up there on the screen too if you want
Yes.
to. For those that don't know, I believe you're on the left. Is that right?
Correct.
You're on the left, and then who's next to you?
It'd be Ron Chapman.
No.
No? Sorry. I'm on the. Oh, that's Sonny Williams.
Yeah.
The owner of Minyards, and was he's an owner, a part owner with the Mavericks, and was a part owner of the Sidekicks at that time.
And his wife?
No, that's Ron Chapman's wife.
Okay, so that's Nancy.
Yes.
So Ron Chapman here, of course,
Yes.
Iconic radio broadcaster, Hall of Fame broadcaster, and his wife Nancy. I mean, I don't know. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with him, and we know so many of the same people.
Yes.
You and I know so many of the same
Well,
people too.
that's Dallas to me.
Yes, it
that's
is.
Dallas.
Yep.
And it's a very friendly city, and there's a kind of association between sport, radio, business. I mean, because Mr. Williams was, I think, a sponsor first and foremost with the company of the Sidekicks, and then Don Carter persuaded him to become one of the owners. So that's how that kind of followed on. And then you met the radio people like Ron in the course of being interviewed with various programs about the Sidekicks. And to me, it's a family.
Yep.
Dallas is a big city, but it's a family atmosphere amongst people.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
you get to meet some very nice people. A great deal of work goes on between sport and charity, and so it's.
Well, and that's how I met Tatu.
Yeah, and
was
that's been
doing
good
a
to
charity
me.
event.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he and as I say, he was probably the second best player in indoor soccer. So a young man called Yugoslavian Steve Zongo was probably the best, but Tatu was the second one in the sport in this country.
You know, I'm in the auction profession
Yes.
and in real estate, and it's interesting that one of the Minyard family members came to my auction school about 3 years ago. No, 4 years ago, probably. Time's flying, you know. The
Of
clock's
course.
ticking all the time. But, yeah, the Minyard family has always been very supportive of sport and charities.
Very
and,
much so.
They did very well. You know, they
Yes.
did very well in Dallas and Fort Worth, and they had a very successful run. So I have another photograph that I want to show, and this is a friend of ours.
Yes.
And someone that Dallas people, if you're really from Dallas, there's people from Dallas, but then there's people that are really from Dallas. And
Yes.
this picture right here, of course, you brought it, and at first I didn't recognize him because I really got to know him in later years. But Joe Hager, of course, of multiple things. Joe Hager is the man who got me involved with St. Jude Children's Hospital. He is the gentleman, he was a mayor pro tem for the city of Dallas. Hager Menswear, which was sold about 6 years ago. But the Hagers in Dallas, they're synonymous with Dallas.
Yes, wonderful.
The girls all went to Ursuline. I know Joe, the junior. Basically,
yes,
he's
right.
actually JM was junior, and then
Correct.
we have the latest version is Joe. And I've worked with all of them on St. Jude, but we were talking. That's one of the reasons I was wearing this tie today as well, because I'm looking for photographs for my father's funeral. I came across so many great pictures of people like Joe, but all I remember is that Joe, he basically instilled in me, you've got to give back. He just gave back, and he was such a proud Catholic. He
Correct.
supported Notre Dame, and he supported the Catholic diocese here in Dallas, and but just multiple charities. He was on the original board with Danny Thomas.
Yes.
A lot of people
well,
don't know
that's how
that.
I met him, of course, Mr. Hager and from Joe and
So
met Mr. Thomas.
tell us about your encounter with Joe, J.M. Hager, and kind of what that meant to you.
Well, I met Joe I had an invite to a cocktail party at his home, and Danny Thomas was the guest of honor. And of course, that's when I found out about their association with St. Jude's Hospital for Children. And so Joe said, well, we've got a big tournament coming up, golf tournament. He said, would you like to come with me to Tulsa, be my guest?
Memphis.
And so off we
Yep.
went in his private jet, had 3 days, went to the St. Jude's Hospital, saw all the young kids there being treated for cancer. And Joe was just unbelievable. I mean, the rapport that he had, even at his age with these young children, was incredible. And had a marvelous time. And then, of course, they had the golf tournament, and he was playing with Gerald Ford.
It was the St. Jude Classic.
St. Jude Classic, Gerald Ford. And I was in the golf cart with a Secret Service man who was guarding Gerald Ford,
Sure.
and had a magnificent time. And as I say, the Sidekicks became big supporters of St. Jude's in terms of raising money for charity and such. But Joe was, as you said, he was just another. As I say, I've met so many kind people in my life, and people who really went out of their way to help others.
Sure.
And
Well, you know,
so
my connection to St. Jude is very deep. In 1998, when I won the International Auctioneering Championship, one of your duties in October is to go to St. Jude and do a toy auction, a fun auction, with the children of St. Jude.
Yeah.
And here you have these little kids, and you know they've all got cancer, and they're fighting for their lives.
Yep.
But they bring them in and let them play. It's a playtime. They gave them play money, which was called Danny Dollars, after Danny Thomas. And we had some great video that we did there. I've been blessed to go 5 or 6 times and be a guest there. And we still raise money for St. Jude, you know, as often as we can. And the school raises money for St. Jude. So, you know, it's a great charity, as you know. And you're privy to a conversation. I'm not going to bring it up, but the bottom line is this. You know that when you donate to St. Jude, you know where the money's going.
That's right.
Because they have one of the lowest cost of overhead.
That's right.
They don't waste money.
That's right. And that came out very strongly at the time when I met Danny Thomas.
Yep.
He was very much aware of that.
Yep.
And he wanted it that way.
Yep.
And his daughter, of course, carried on
Marlo.
afterwards. But as I say, great people and a great cause, and to see those little kids. Anybody that gets a chance to go to St. Jude's,
Needs
take
to go.
it, because it's
You
quite
can
a sight.
you can call. You can set up a
Visit,
tour.
yeah.
They're very gracious. They want the world to see.
That's what
St.
they're
Jude.
doing. Yes, it's beautiful.
I just I can't say enough about the cause.
Yes.
So that's important, and we care about that. Actually, 2 years ago, the National Auctioneer Association donated enough money to St. Jude that they have a brand new boardroom. It's a conference room for all the doctors to come in from all over the world to this, and it has the National Auctioneers Association on the plate at the door, and
Nice.
if you're in the hospital, if you get a chance to tour it, just go where all the flags are, and if you see all the flags from all over the world.
Yeah.
Upstairs, you will see that conference room. It looks over all the flags. It was
nice.
fantastic. It was a great celebration, and we were happy about that. Now, so that's enough about Joe Hager and company, our good friend. Of course, we lost Joe
Yes.
probably about 10 years ago.
Possibly, yes.
Yeah,
It's
somewhere
goes-
around there.
Time has flown.
Yeah,
but,
I've always he used to when we would do those auctions, and like I said, we did the auction. Real quick, I can't just quit talking about Joe that quick. The one thing about Joe is they would donate rounds of golf at the St. Jude event here in Dallas at the evening under the stars that I was involved with for probably 10 or 12 years, and but they would line up these rounds of golf at various places. So there might be in Wisconsin at the best course in Wisconsin, and then the best course in Pebble Beach. They pick 3 or 4, and they say, okay, you're going to get on a plane, and you're going to travel to each of these 4 locations in a week and play all these.
Yeah.
And Joe would donate his plane for that.
Yes.
And I did mention on my Facebook page last Monday, it was sometime during the week, I posted about Charlie Daniels. So when Charlie agreed and offered to play for the St. Jude event at the Fairmont Hotel downtown, Joe sent his plane to pick up Charlie and fly him in, did the event. Charlie says, I got to go. And that's what Charlie Daniels always did, is he would play, but part of his deal was he wanted to be through early enough where he could fly home, unless he had another gig close. But he would just fly, because he was at an age too, even though he was 83, he'd had so many health issues in the last 10, 15 years. People don't realize how many things. He'd had heart issues and stroke issues, and they say even when he had this last stroke, he would have lived had he not had to be on blood thinners. They couldn't stop the bleeding from the stroke this time. Anyway, interesting story there. Now, this is something special, and I saved this one towards the end. We've still got about 5 to 10 minutes. Tell me about this.
Well, this is my very proud moment. I'm meeting Queen Elizabeth.
Would you say this is one of the proudest moments?
Oh, yes.
Is it the top?
I think so, because it was the honor that she gave me that I appreciate.
Tell me what honor is. What is it?
I received the Member of the British Empire, an MBE, on that day at Buckingham Palace when I met the Queen, and it was for services to international youth football.
Okay.
And it was, I'd been recommended by the 2 British consuls here in Dallas and Houston, and the Foreign Office decided that the Queen would give me an honour of the British Empire. And I had the invitation to go to Buckingham Palace. I was allowed to take 3 guests. So, of course, I took my wife, my daughter, and her husband, and it was just an
Now, was this 06?
2006.
2006. I have a little memory left.
Yes, and it was quite something.
How old is the Queen? Is she 120?
No, she's not there yet. She's in her 90s. She, I think, was 86, I believe.
Is she?
When
I
met her.
She just doesn't look any different.
No.
If you look at her over the last 30 years, I don't know what she's doing, but whatever it is, it's great.
Well, she's certainly some woman, and she presented 110 awards that day. Incredible. 3 people got knighted, and she was on the dais for about an hour and 20 minutes when I went. And I was the 92nd person to receive the honor. And they'd kind of educated us what was going to happen. And they said that the Queen will enter into conversation. She doesn't want to hear your life story. Oh, thank you very much. And when she extends her right hand, that's the signal that the interview is over.
You're done.
You're done. Step back, bow, and turn to your right, exit. And it was all lined up. Now, she had done 92 people before me. And hour and 20 minutes on the dais presented. And they put a clip on your jacket, and when she gives you the medal, she clips it on. And she could have easily said, put the medal on straight away, well done, get rid of you. I mean, I've had an hour and 20 minutes, I'm 86 years of age. And she didn't. She asked a couple of questions, 2 or 3 questions, and it was probably only about 4 or 5 minutes. But it seemed much
4
longer.
or 5 minutes
It seemed much
pretty good
longer.
with the Queen.
And she was genuinely interested. And I remember she said, are you still involved in youth soccer? And that conversation. But she was delightful. And she, I say, I always respected her. But she went up, in my opinion, the manner in which she conducted.
You never forget the first impression, do you?
No. And
That's
she was special.
We talk about that in auction school, and and whenever I've spoken at different conventions and things, I always talk about when someone meets you, you have one shot at a first impression. You better make it good.
Yeah, that's the
Because
first
people never
impressions are
forget.
very important. But
I want to talk about your book, but I also want to have you tell me what's happening in soccer right now because of what's happening in the world. You were preparing, I'm sure, and I know you're a consultant with the Dallas Cup, and you know, with this pandemic situation, I mean, you had upwards of 250 teams prepared to come to the United States and participate in this. So tell us what's happening.
Yes, this year the tournament is held in Dallas every Easter, and this Easter, of course, we had the problem of the virus, and we had to cancel. It was just impossible. We were bringing in 250 teams. 70 were from overseas, from 40 different countries. So it was risky to have brought those teams in. And we made the board made the right decision and made it very early before many things were not cancelled. But we cancelled the tournament because we could see that we only had to have one boy or one official from one of those countries, or even from the United States coming in.
Well, it's liability.
One boy with the problem, it could have caused massive problems. So we had to cancel. So it was a great loss because it's a wonderful...
it's a missed opportunity.
Oh, yes. And then for me, it's like an old boys reunion because there's so many former players and coaches that come with the teams. We get to see each other just that 1 week. And it's a great social week for those boys. And they're from under 13 to under 18. They're from all over the world. And it's a great time.
Yeah. Well, it's infectious, and you've set a very high bar for a lot of people over the years.
Well, again, I was very fortunate. I got the opportunity. I'd retired from president of the league. That was my last job in soccer. And the Dallas Cup came to me and said, would you like to be our executive director? Our executive director's retiring.
And an ambassador.
And that's it. And then I did 12 years as the executive director. And then when I said that's it, because my wife was unwell, unfortunately, they said, well, please be a consultant. And so I continued to be, and to this day. And my job at the moment is to obtain sponsorship and bring in the top team. So, I'll contact Manchester United or Barcelona or Sao Paulo and negotiate to bring their teams up to Dallas Cup each Easter. But it was a shame this year, but it was the right decision. It was the only decision to cancel because of the virus.
So what's the financial impact?
12.2 million. So the Dallas Visitors Convention tell me that we bring in during that time.
Hotels.
Food. We booked 8,000. We had booked 8,000 hotel room nights for the teams, and I had 42 15-seater vans.
Wow.
You couldn't get a 15-seater van in Dallas, in Texas or Oklahoma. We had them all. But it's a wonderful gathering. of the youth of the world, and
It gives you hope.
Oh yes, it does, and the friendships that are made, Mike, and continued over many years.
Sports does that.
Yeah, and often we've had people play in the tournament as a boy, and they're now coming back as a coach.
Sure.
They've gone back to their own country, or when
You're
citizens of the
seeing them
United
again
States.
20 years later,
That's it.
30 years later.
That's it. And
As we wrap, I want to talk about, you did this. It's called A Soccer Pioneer, the autobiography of Gordon Jago with Wayne Barton. This is your life story, Gordon Jago. You want to tell us about this book?
yes, it's very interesting. When they approached me, I didn't want to do it. I felt it was not so, but anyway, they convinced me, and I met this young ghostwriter, and he came over from England, and spent 10 days with me, and taped. But the nicest thing about it, when I got the first copies back of what he'd written, I sent them to my daughter, and my daughter called me immediately, and she said, "Dad, he's captured you." And they did, and the young man who did it, he really, when I read it, it felt right. It was me. And the story of the whole life is there. But the other interesting factor is that we say my wife was a police officer, and so we got to know police officers here in Dallas. And the Dallas Cup, when she died, formed a memorial fund in her name. And so when I heard about the royalties from the book, they said, "Where would you like them to go?" I wanted them to go to June's Memorial Fund, and from there into the Dallas Fallen Officers Fund.
Great.
And so all the monies that we are getting from the book, all the royalties, go straight to the Dallas Police for the children of officers killed or injured in the line of duty.
That's awesome.
And June would be very proud.
Very proud of that.
Very proud of that.
Well, I'm proud of that. And I'm proud that you were able to do that. I'm very proud of your success. I'm honored to know you. And every life has a story. You've got a great story. You've had a great life. And, I don't know what you're going to do for the next 20 years. But but nothing would make me happier than to see you here in 20 years.
Well, Mike, I thank you for the opportunity this morning to be able to tell the story, and I hope it's been of interest to the viewers and listeners. But it's been, as I said right at the start, very, very fortunate to have had a wonderful life, enjoying what I do and earning a living. A lot of people have to go to work just to make a living and pay the bills.
Yeah.
And many of them don't have the joy of their occupation, unfortunately. So my advice to all the young folk that I meet and throughout my life and still do is that if you can, find a occupation that gives you enjoyment.
Sure.
And because that's so important. And I'm very lucky, as I say, at this moment still to be around and still involved. And so I thank the good Lord.
Very good. Well, we hope that the Dallas Cup comes back next year and comes back stronger than ever. And I think when the pandemic is over and all this gets sorted out, I think that's exactly what's going to happen. I think the things that matter to us the most, whether it's hanging out with people at a soccer game or watching the young people be involved in youth soccer, it's going to come back stronger than ever because people are going to be ready. They're going to be ready to move forward with lives. And just a shout out to the National Auctioneers Association. We have our virtual conference and show, which would have been in San Diego next week, is going to be virtually broadcast, and that's going to be next Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So I invite all of our members and the folks that are involved in our industry to join us virtually, and let's keep our association strong in this challenging time. We had a hurricane last year. We got a pandemic this year. We're hoping that we won't have anything next year. But on behalf of everybody that's been a part of this show, we certainly appreciate you being with us. The 80th episode of the Mike McGavel Jones Show is going in the can, and check it out anytime you want to. We're on YouTube and other social media sites. And so on behalf of everybody here from Dallas, Texas, we bid you adieu. God bless, and we'll see you next time.